Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Rideout, and today I'm going to be going over related difficulties that we may come across, see, or maybe have seen in our dyslexic students. So sometimes we see that our students with dyslexia have dyslexia, and then perhaps it's paired with other learning or emotional problems. Now, some of the conditions associated with dyslexia may be the result of the way the child's brain was formed or even how it functions. So to give us a bit of a roadmap, today we're going to look at some common related difficulties that include ADD and ADHD. We're going to take a look at dysgraphia, oral language, executive functioning skills and organization, and then we're going to wrap up by talking about dyscalculia. So we're going to begin by looking at ADD and ADHD. And ADD stands for Attention Deficit Disorder, and ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Now, ADD and ADHD are one of the most common developmental problems and can actually affect about 3 to 5% of our school population. So typical characteristics of ADD may be inattention and distractibility. But with ADHD, our students are going to have inattention, distractibility, but will also show characteristics of hyperactivity and impulsivity. It's important to point out the strong relationship that we have between ADD and ADHD and dyslexia. 30% of those that have dyslexia also have coexisting ADD and ADHD. So we're probably going to see these two difficulties coincide often. Now, I've heard rumors, and I'm sure you've had rumors that, or heard rumors that ADD and ADHD are overdiagnosed, but that's not actually what's happening. What's actually happening is that there's been an increase in awareness. So now that more people are aware, this has resulted in an increase in the number of individuals diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. So there actually isn't an overdiagnosis happening, rather there's just an increase in awareness. Now, on the flip side of that, we often see that girls and gifted children are actually underdiagnosed, or they could even be diagnosed later. Oftentimes with girls, they have ADD versus ADHD, where their essential feature is inattention. So they're lacking that hyperactivity. So what you'll often hear is the teacher say, you know, Diane is so sweet and she's so nice and she works so quietly and she keeps to herself. But what's really happening is she's kind of slipping through the cracks because she's not getting that attention during her inattention. So oftentimes with ADHD, we see that hyperactivity, and that's what really gets the teacher's attention to, ooh, you know, something's not quite right. And because girls lack that, they can often slip through the cracks. Now, gifted children may be identified late because they have such strong intellectual abilities, and this can help them compensate or even hide those weaknesses in attention. So here in this image, we can really see how a non-ADHD student really can kind of funnel the not important aspects of their day, while a student with ADHD, everything is important, everything is fun, and it just all comes out at one time. So let's take a look at how these two different diagnoses of ADHD and ADD and dyslexia actually share a lot of characteristics. So they're very different from their root, but they can often have similar characteristics that make them self-present. So our first four are difficulty paying attention, avoiding reading, disfluent reading, deriving little pleasure from reading. So for the dyslexic student, all of these could really be because they're having a hard time keeping up with the content, or perhaps they're in such a state of information overload that they're having difficulty paying attention. They're just so overwhelmed. But for a student with just ADD or ADHD, this is just one of their traits. It's not that they can't keep up with the content or they're struggling with the content. They're struggling with the attention and the distractibility. So really, it's kind of, we look at it as it's kind of inattention and distractibility versus an actual struggle with the content. They can also both, again, struggle with handwriting because of that inattention versus the struggling with making the formations. And then we often see both have difficulties with spelling, with grammar, with proofreading, and then even with organization. Now, dysgraphia is going to be our next related disorder. And dysgraphia is a specific learning disability that affects how easily children acquire written language and then how well they use written language to express their thoughts. So dysgraphia is actually a Greek word, and we have a base word in here, graph. And graph refers to the hand's function writing, and it also refers to the letters formed by the hand. So our prefix is dys, and dys indicates that there's an impairment. So graph refers to producing letter forms by hand, and then our suffix ia refers to having a condition. So if we put all of that together, dysgraphia is the condition of impaired letter writing by hand that is disabled handwriting and sometimes spelling. And impaired handwriting can really interfere with learning to spell words and writing because they're so focused on how to make the letter formations that all of their attention is going into that and not necessarily the rules of spelling. And this condition affects both thinking and motor skills, and it really leads a student to struggle to put their thoughts into words on paper. So here we can see that there's 4 major areas that we're going to talk about, and the first is organization. So a student with dysgraphia would really benefit from some sort of visual support. And they might require time to plan things out visually. So we wouldn't necessarily want to just hand them a blank sheet of paper and tell them to write us a paragraph. That is going to be very difficult for them. And oftentimes they're going to produce messy or unorganized work, and their paper might look like the one that we have here on the left. Now with fine motor, some things that we can do to kind of strengthen those hand muscles are to have them connect dots or dashes to create complete letter forms, trace letters with their fingers, imitate the teacher modeling those sequential strokes and letter formations, and we could even give them a pencil grip to help with this. So as we can see in this dysgraphic text in our image, their formation and their spacing and their sizing of letters is going to be very messy and unorganized. And oftentimes, when they do write, it's going to be slow and laborious for them. And it's still, even though they're going so slowly and they're giving it so much attention, they are still producing very poor handwriting. So because it's so laborious for them, they have difficulty concentrating because they're getting tired very quickly. It's a lot for them to think, first of all, of what words do I write, and now how do I make those kinesthetic movements to form the letters. So things that we can do in the classroom, we can give them extra time when writing. We can break down instruction for them, as we said up in that first one, or organization. We can give them visual support. So we're not going to necessarily give them an empty piece of paper. We're going to give them something with lines, boxes that they can fill in. And then something that's really great for learning those letter formations is to study numbered arrow cues. So for example, if you're teaching the letter V, maybe you're going to draw a down arrow, and then you're going to draw an up arrow next to the letter so they can see the pattern and the arrow cues that they can follow. So not every student that has dyslexia will also have dysgraphia, but we can see that if this child has both dyslexia and dysgraphia, a student's really going to struggle to put their thoughts into words on paper. So not only would they struggle to spell the words, but then they would also be struggling with how to create the letter formation for the words. So again, dysgraphia may occur alone, or it could be with dyslexia. And then children with impaired handwriting may also have ADD or ADHD, and some of these combined inattentive and hyperactive subtypes. So now we've got oral language, and oral language refers to the knowledge and skills that we use to produce and understand our spoken language. Language knowledge and skills also serve as the foundation for learning to read and write. And oral language is really composed of 5 main components. So we've got phonology, which is understanding and use of speech sounds in our words. So this could be some sound combinations are going to work and some not. So they're going to understand that is a final blend, but is not. Or they're going to know that like in sing, is at the end of a word, but we're not going to find this in the beginning of a word. So now we have morphology, which is understanding the use of meaningful word parts. So like our prefixes, our bases, and our suffixes. So that they would understand that preheated and reheated form 2 different word meanings. Vocabulary or semantics is really understanding and the use of the meaning of words. So for example, the word order changes the meaning. So if we say the squirrel chased the bird, that means something very different from the bird chased the squirrel. So they understand that words have meaning and that word order changes that meaning. Now with syntax, that's understanding the use of grammatical aspects of language. So these are really the set of rules or the principles that kind of govern the structure of our sentences and our language. And they usually include word order as well. So we would say the turkey was delicious. We wouldn't say the turkey delicious was. And then pragmatics is the understanding and use of language in various contexts. So this is going to be understanding the social rules of communication. And these could include rules for opening and closing conversations, staying on topic. I know that I have one student that could talk to me about Legos and Star Wars for 7 hours, and they wouldn't need me to insert anything at all. So they don't know when to open or close the conversation. And maybe I asked this student a question about math, and now we're talking about Legos and Star Wars. And then these also, or pragmatics also includes rules on the speech style used when we're speaking with different people. So our speech style is going to be different when I speak to a child versus when I speak to a friend, when I speak to my family, maybe a stranger, or even an employer. So those are our 5 main components of oral language. Children have a natural gift for language learning, and most children actually acquire oral language with really little difficulty. But some children have problems in language development, and they demonstrate impairments in their use or understanding of spoken language. So children may have difficulties pronouncing words, acquiring vocabulary, and learning the grammatical rules of language. And now the environment could play a role in language problems, but these difficulties are primarily the result of neurological and genetic factors. So children with dyslexia most often have the following problems with the phonological component of language. So they typically struggle with phonological awareness, phonological memory, phonological retrieval. But the inclusion of deficits in oral language beyond the phonological component may place children at a higher risk for dyslexia. So now we've got executive functioning, and executive functioning is really an umbrella term for the complex cognitive processes that underlie flexible and goal-directed learning. Now, the crucial role of executive function processes and literacy actually begin in preschool years, but they become more important as students progress through middle and high school, because here they're expected to master complex skills in reading comprehension, summarizing, note-taking, multi-stage writing projects, and their academic performance becomes increasingly dependent on a variety of skills and abilities like planning and organizing and prioritizing information, reading for meaning, separating main idea from details in a text, monitoring their progress. Now, there are several key executive function processes that influence literacy and academic performance, and these are goal setting, cognitive flexibility or flexible thinking, organizing and prioritizing, working memory, and the ability to self-monitor. So students who struggle with these executive function processes often experience frustration and failure, and as the curriculum intensifies, they feel that their brains are kind of clogged with information. So let's take a deeper look at those 5 key executive function processes that I just mentioned, because these really influence literacy and all academic performance. So with goal setting, this is going to be setting short-term and long-term goals for completing these open-ended tasks. So writing papers, completing projects, studying for tests. This is going to be very difficult for someone that struggles with executive functioning. Prioritizing and organizing different components of multi-stage projects after researching. So all of these steps and what do I prioritize, how do I organize all of this information is going to be a struggle for them. The ability to shift flexibly, which we often see are sub-skills involved in reading and writing, like when we shift between the main idea and supporting details, or even in test when we have to shift between different formats. So when we have multiple choice questions, and then we've got to go to open-ended questions, and then we go back to multiple choice questions. We can do that pretty easily, but someone that struggles with executive functioning and shifting that flexible thinking is going to have a hard time with that. Accessing the information in their working memory. So when they have to take notes or outline while reading, or maybe even they're studying, they're going to have trouble focusing on the big picture and then the small details. And then how do these small details and supporting details fit back into that big picture? They're not going to know what is the important and relevant information to take notes on. What are the things that I'm even trying to focus on? And then turning in that final product, they are very, very unlikely to self-monitor. They're just going to turn it in and not reflect upon their work to see if they actually demonstrated or showed understanding of the content. Now we have dyscalculia. And dyscalculia is a specific learning disability that affects a child's ability to understand, learn, and perform math and number-based operations. So there's a little asterisk down here because not all difficulties in math class are caused by dyscalculia. So our disorders like dyslexia or that visual and auditory processing, even ADHD, these can impact a child's ability to meet expectations in completing those math problems. So some children with dyslexia have difficulty learning mathematical concepts and vocabulary, but they might not necessarily have dyscalculia. So for example, a dyslexic student, they might find it difficult to recognize mathematical symbols, especially those that are similar to the problems that they have in learning written language. So what I mean by that is the same problems that they have in learning the symbols in the written language, learning those letter formations, they may also have the same difficulties in recognizing mathematical symbols. Additionally, solving math problems that are presented in sentence form could be especially challenging because of their difficulty with language. So if they're having difficulty solving word problems, they might not necessarily have dyscalculia, they might just have difficulty with language. So some characteristics of dyscalculia could be that comprehension of math symbols. They're not sure which meaning goes with which symbol. They could struggle with memorizing or organizing their numbers. Difficulty sequencing information or events, so before, after, yesterday, tomorrow, last weekend, this weekend. They might have difficulty recognizing patterns when adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. And they definitely will have difficulty understanding concepts related to time. So to kind of wrap up, sometimes we see that our students with dyslexia have dyslexia and then perhaps it's paired with another learning problem or a learning difficulty. So some of our students may have dyslexia and ADHD, or some of our students may have dyslexia and impairments in oral language. It's important to mention, though, that not all students with dyslexia will experience other disorders or difficulties, but it is important to know how to problem solve flexibly should they demonstrate any additional characteristics of related orders. As always, if you have any further questions, please feel free to email.